Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Falsco, President and CEO of the Alaska World Affairs Council, and it's such a pleasure to have everyone join us today for a special program featuring a very own Alaskan, Dr. Zach Brown, who is going to be talking about trekking the climate change from knowledge to action. Today in Anchorage, it's about 45 degrees and a little bit cloudy outside. I hope the weather is clear and clean wherever you are in the world. And I saw a moose run across the road on my way into work today. So for all of you local Alaskans, I was driving down Minnesota Drive and a big bull moose went by. I don't know if that's good luck, but it feels like a very lucky day. And it's wonderful to be here in Alaska. Please say hello to us wherever you are in the world in our chat room. You say your name, say hello to us and each other and the speaker. Let us know where you're at. And we're so glad that you joined us for today's program. We're going to do something fun today where we'll have some pop-up poll questions that will periodically appear throughout the program. So feel free to answer and participate and join in the discussion about climate. I'll have a little bit about personal action versus collective action as well in the chat room. So join in the conversation that way. We will also have a Q&A at the end. So please feel free at any time to write down your question in the chat room, and we will be taking the questions and reading them to our speaker at the end. We are one of 95 councils around the United States. The Alaska World Affairs Council has bringing the world to Alaska for over 60 years, and we are very excited about this opportunity now for the first time with Zoom to be able to bring Alaska and the Arctic to the world. And this program is one of those programs. Special thanks to our members, our supporters, our partners who make programs like this possible. Today's program is in partnership with some wonderful organizations. We have Alaska Common Ground, Alaska Public Media, UAA, APU Bookstore, and our friends down in Juneau with the Juneau World Affairs Council. We also have major sponsors that make today's programs possible. Thanks so much to the Atwood Foundation, the CIRI Foundation, the Humanities Forum, and the Rasmussen Foundation. I see some familiar faces that are joining us today. Thank you so much for coming back. If you are new, raise your hand. Do I see any new people? This is your very first Alaska World Affairs Council program. There you are out there. I hope you come back again. We have a robust program series planned for you this year. Some of those are up on our website, so go to alaskaworldaffairs.org to find out more. October is going to be a jammed month with 4 programs, but you don't want to miss any of them. And here's why. We're starting out on October 2nd with Dr. Young Zhao. And Dr. Zhao is somebody we can't forget. He came in 2015. He's originally from China. He teaches education here in the United States and in Australia, and he's the guru when it comes to forward thinking of education and analysis of education systems around the world in a way that we hadn't heard before. And he's going to be talking about the future of education in a post-pandemic world. I can't say enough about that program. We're also going to have a little bit of fun, not that our programs aren't fun, on October 16th, that's Friday the 16th, with our annual fundraiser, the Pub Quiz World Whiz Trivia. This year we're going virtual. There's great cash prizes and bragging rights for people who participate. So come and join us. We'll have a social mixer before and after. It's gonna be a whole lot of fun with some really great questions, and you don't have to worry about driving afterwards. You can be in your own home and join us for this really fun event for World Trivia World Whiz. That's on the Friday the 16th. We also have for members only, and if you're not currently a member, please consider joining the Alaska World Affairs Council and becoming a member. If you are, thank you so much for being a member. Members only program on the 22nd of October with Her Royal Highness Ambassador Rima Al Saud, and she is the first female ambassador from Saudi Arabia to the United States, and we are just thrilled to hear her talk to us on the 22nd of October. And then if you've ever wanted to go to Africa but been concerned about, is that an accessible place to travel to? We are bringing a travel guru, Dr. Peter Chilson, who's going to then Zoom in a friend of his from Timbuktu, a journalist there. We'll talk a little bit about Alaska, Timbuktu, travel in Africa, and how accessible that is. So that's all in October. I hope if you're new, you join us for some more programs. We'd love to see you again. And if you are a member, thank you. Like our members today who renew their membership, you know who you are. Thank you so very much. Everybody here is on mute. We're going to keep it that way, except for myself and the person talking. And like I said, everyone, please use our chat function and talk with each other. So right now, I would like to turn over the microphone to our partner from Alaska Common Ground. We have board member of Alaska Common Ground, Mary Lou Harrell. Thank you so much for joining us, and she'd like to say a couple words. Mary Lou, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks so much. And I am Mary Lou Harrell on the board of Alaska Common Ground. And Alaska Common Ground is really pleased to be co-sponsoring today's talk by Zach Brown. Alaska Common Ground is a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization that works to help Alaskans understand the major public policy issues facing our state. One of our themes at Alaska Common Ground is climate change, with a focus on how climate change impacts Alaskans and what Alaskans can do to address our changing climate. Last November, we hosted an informative discussion on the municipality's climate action plan. And in February, we hosted an open house showcasing many local organizations working on aspects of climate change so that members of the interested public could see where they could get involved. We're currently planning a series of events beginning in January based on the 7 sectors of the Anchorage Climate Action Plan. These events will focus on what citizens and businesses can do to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Topics such as buildings and energy and food security will be among the monthly events. At the present time, all events are on Zoom and are announced on our website, Facebook page, and through email. Alaska Common Ground has also traditionally held debates on statewide ballot measures that Alaskans will vote on. Coming up next month, our discussions on this year's 2 ballot measures are Tuesday, October 6th, on the oil tax ballot measure 1, and Wednesday, October 14th, on the elections initiative. Both events will start at 7, and they're free on Zoom. Please do join us at these events and check our Alaska Common Ground Facebook page and website for information about our events. Thanks much.
Thank you, Mary Lou. So great to see you, and thank you so much for partnering with us today. We are big fans of Alaska Common Ground. And now I'd like to introduce my friend and the chairman of the board of directors of the Alaska World Affairs Council, the wonderful, esteemed Mr. Steve Limbeck, who will introduce our speaker today. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. And I want to also add, as board chair of the World Affairs Council, I want to add my thanks to Alaska Common Ground and Alaska Public Media and the other partners. It's particularly a treat for us to have the Juneau World Affairs Council involved today. So welcome to everyone, and it's nice to see so many friends in the chat room today. I think we're in for a really terrific program. Zach Brown, Ph.D., lives and breathes climate change. He's a scientist, an educator, an activist, and an adventurer, as you'll see. He was born and raised in Alaska. He spent years aboard ice-breaking vessels in the Arctic and the Antarctic, studying how warming and sea ice loss seas and their environment and their inhabitants. After completing his doctoral studies, he was driven to do more to protect our living world. So he set off on a 4-month, 2,300-mile solo trek, hiking and paddling from California back home to Alaska. His goal was to found Inian Islands Institute, a field school dedicated to education, science, and environmental leadership. And he now serves there as the executive director. Friends, please welcome Zach Brown.
Hey, everybody. I hope you all are happy and healthy. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'd like to begin by acknowledging with honor and respect that I am speaking to you on the Tlingit Ani, on the traditional lands of the Hunakawu. And I'd like to thank Alaska World Affairs Council Common Ground and UAA for inviting me here to speak. I'm so honored to be with you. Thanks to you all, most of all, for being here, for taking time out of your lives on your lunch hour. We need all hands on deck right now for the climate crisis. The hour is late. Greta Thunberg reminds us our house is on fire. So thank you for paying attention, for getting involved. My name is Zach. I'm beaming into you from my home in Gustavus in Southeast Alaska. I'm going to speak about trekking the climate crisis. I'd much rather be giving this presentation in person so that I could see you, meet you, interact, shake your hand, hear your story about climate change. But the Zoom world is not so bad. You know, I'm here on my couch at home. I've got a lunchtime beer poured. And so let's do it. And I kill my video and I'm going to start my screen. All right. Okay. Hope y'all can see that okay. So, as Steve said, my background is in climate science. I was super privileged to get to go to the ends of the earth. I spent years working on ice-breaking ships, traveling back and forth from the Arctic to the Antarctic seas. I'm a bipolar scientist. So here I am taking water samples from under the Arctic pack ice and in Antarctica, chilling with penguins between drilling ice cores. But enough time passed doing this stuff and carbon emissions just kept growing. The climate just kept warming. I decided my science was not really making that much of a difference. The science has been clear for a long time. So I took a big left turn towards climate education and activism. When I finished my Ph.D., I did this big crazy trek up the coast. This is where our title of the talk comes from. Set off walking from Stanford University in California. This is me just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And when I got to Washington State, I got in a kayak and paddled up the Inside Passage, which took me about 4 months going 2,300 miles. It'd be super fun to tell some of the stories and misadventures. We'll have to do that another time. Next time. Today, alas, I'm going to move us right along to talk about climate. That's why we're here. But the goal of my trek was to start this school here in Southeast Alaska called Inian Islands Institute, where we teach about climate change, among other things. And, you know, so here's a student group on top of the island. It's a really sweet place. If you find yourself in Southeast, I definitely encourage you to come visit. I'm taking my Inian Islands Institute hat off today. I come to you not as a nonprofit director, but as somebody who lives and breathes climate change and a deeply concerned global citizen. So this is where we're going today. Why aren't we changing? You know, there's a lot of answers floating around to this question. There's a lot of bad climate information out there. I'd like to help clear a few things up today because I believe that before we can make change, we have to understand the true nature of the crisis. Now, we're going to end up going to a bit of a deep, dark place today. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but stick with me because out of this deep, dark place, we're going to emerge back into the light like a seed that got buried. So let's start here. What is the climate crisis not? The climate crisis is not a scientific problem. Take it from me, we're not stuck in inaction because we don't know enough. We know plenty. By the 1890s, Svante Arrhenius, the Swedish chemist, had advanced a full-fledged theory of global warming, predicting that the burning of coal would eventually warm the earth. The fact that CO2 absorbs the same wavelengths of radiation that the earth emits, thus trapping its heat, has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with economics, nothing to do with religion or belief. It's just a fact. We've known about it for well over a century. Climate change is also not a scientific problem. It's in its solutions, which may come as a bit more of a surprise. What I'm showing here this is from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. It shows the price of solar panels in orange and global solar installations in blue. You can see the exponential decline in price and the exponential increase in solar capacity. Now, a couple years ago, Bill Gates, one of the world's richest men, decided he was going to turn some of his philanthropy toward the climate crisis. And he came out and said, we need an energy miracle to fix the climate crisis. And people from the climate movement who've actually been paying attention slapped their foreheads and said, no, we don't need energy miracles. That makes it sound like at the moment we have no choice but fossil fuels, which is complete BS. So Michael Liebrick, a global renewable energy expert, responded, are you kidding? In the last 2 decades, the price of solar panel has come down 150-fold and deployment has gone up by 115,000-fold. How much more miracle-y do you need your miracles to be? This is our miracle. It has arrived. Solar power now delivers the cheapest energy ever, anywhere, from any technology in history. And I could show comparable miracle graphs for wind power, for battery storage, for electric vehicles, for smart grids. The renewable energy revolution is going so fast, it has demolished the predictions of the world's energy experts. And so, Mark Jacobson, a colleague of mine from Stanford, has for the last decade been publishing comprehensive roadmaps for every nation on Earth and every state of the union to convert entirely to wind, water, and solar with existing technology. With existing technology. These plans would create more jobs than they would lose, and they would save millions of human lives, mainly through the reduction of air pollution, which causes some 10,000 premature deaths every single day around the world. And of course, as an added bonus, we avoid the catastrophic impacts of climate change. Really hard to see what's not to like about this. So the big question is, why aren't we doing it? Why, if there's so much to like? Well, to understand that, we can turn to the work of Bill McKibben, who's one of our greatest living climate warriors. In 2012, McKibben published a sobering article in Rolling Stone, which I consider the most important climate change article ever written. This was the cover photo of that Rolling Stone issue. Justin Bieber, hot, ready, legal. So naturally, I bought 5 copies. But if you look in the top right is an article called The Terrifying New Math of Climate Change. In it, McKibben lays out 3 numbers that clearly show the true nature of the climate crisis. I hope you'll really focus in and come with me now. The first number, 2 degrees Celsius. This is our safe ceiling for average global temperature rise relative to pre-industrial temperatures. In other words, this is how much we can warm the planet before catastrophe really hits, meaning spiraling extreme weather disasters, famine and droughts, a refugee crisis beyond imagining, the death of all coral reefs on the planet, the flooding of Earth's coastal cities. These are the things that really begin happening at 2 degrees. To put that in context, so far we've warmed the Earth just about 1.1 degrees Celsius, but it's important to understand that even if we stopped emitting tomorrow, the planet would continue to warm to at least 1.5 degrees Celsius. There's a lot of lag time built into something as massive and complex as the global climate system. So we've already locked in 1.5, and our limit is 2. With me so far? So, the second number, 565 gigatons. This is the amount of additional carbon we can emit from here onward and still stay below the 2-degree threshold. That is, this is our carbon quota. Very basically, if we burn less than this, we're okay. If we burn more, we're screwed. Now, each year, humanity emits around 35 gigatons. What the heck is a gigaton? It's a billion metric tons. Okay, so imagine El Capitan in Yosemite Valley. There we go. That's El Capitan on the left, probably the most famous cliff in the world. Did any of you guys see the, here we go. Did any of you guys see the film Free Solo, where Alex Honnold scales El Capitan with no ropes? It's a pretty wild film. Well, that wall is about 1 kilometer high. Take that height and make it into a cube, a 1 kilometer cube. Fill that with water, it would weigh a gigaton. Now put 35 of those side by side by side, and you come up with how much carbon we emit each year. It is an almost unimaginable amount. Do the math, and you'll see that we have about 16 years. So about the time today's kindergartners are graduating from high school, we will have surpassed our quota of carbon we can safely emit. Except that this article was written 8 years ago. Still with me? Now, the third number, 2795 gigatons. This is the amount of carbon that would be released if we dug up and burned all the proven fossil fuel reserves, all the coal, all the oil, all the gas that fossil fuel companies are sitting on. This carbon is technically still in the ground, but as McKibben points out, it is economically above ground. What I mean by that is it's the basis of fossil fuel company share prices on the stock market. Companies are borrowing against it, using it as collateral, trading it. Entire nations are basing their budgets on it. The point being, this is the amount of carbon we are planning to burn. And it won't have escaped your notice that 2795 is greater than 565, 5 times greater. On the right is the amount climate scientists say is safe to burn. On the left is the amount we're planning to burn. Now, this is deeply disturbing. This is what Greta Thunberg means when she says, I want you to panic. But before you panic, take a look at the implication here. What this implies is that in order to have a hope of staying within the 2-degree limit, we need to leave 80% of these proven fossil fuel reserves in the ground, right? Does that make sense? We know that 5 times more than can be safely burned is under our feet, so we can only burn a fifth of it. 80% has to stay in the ground. But here's the kicker. Here's where we come to the fourth number, and it's a doozy. That 80% of proven fossil fuel reserves, known as the unburnable carbon, that represents some $20 trillion in profits to the fossil fuel industry. So now we can begin to see the true nature of the climate crisis. Try telling ExxonMobil or Royal Dutch Shell they have to leave $20 trillion in the ground. Think they're going to like that very much? Not so much. And they're going to fight tooth and nail to ensure that the number is the one on the left and not the one on the right. See where we're going with this. So let's dig into the true nature of the climate crisis. I know it won't surprise any of you to learn that there are some close ties between the fossil fuel industry and our government. There's an exchange going on here. There's an arrow going in this direction. What does industry do for government? Well, the big one is campaign finance, right? The disastrous 2010 Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, unleashed a tidal wave of dirty campaign money sloshing through our government. How about lobbying? The fossil fuel industry is lobbying our federal government at a rate of about $1 million per day, just pushing for policies that benefit them. About the arrow going the other direction. What does government do for the fossil fuel industry? Well, subsidies and tax breaks is one of the biggest. The fossil fuel industry globally is subsidized to the tune of around $2 trillion per year. Subsidies make fossil fuels artificially profitable for the companies and artificially cheap for the consumers so that we're happy to keep filling up our giant gas guzzlers. How about policy? Policies like being able to drill on federal lands, reduction of oversight and regulation, not having to disclose, for example, the slurry the fracking industry is pumping into our groundwater, policies that make it harder for people to purchase electric vehicles or add rooftop solar, and on and on. And increasingly right now, we're seeing political appointments, people from the fossil fuel industry coming straight into government. Basically the government saying, well, we don't even need to make the policies for you. You can come right in the door of the Capitol building and do it yourself. And around this nefarious circle we go. And out of this nefarious circle is spawned climate change denial. It's really important for us as global citizens to understand that climate change denial doesn't just happen. Half the country doesn't just wake up one day and say, you know what, that climate science is a load of hooey. No, climate change denial is manufactured by the industry that stands to gain. Let's just say it is extremely profitable for the fossil fuel industry to have the nation divided on whether the climate crisis even exists. So they work very hard and spend a lot of money to confuse the public. Over the past few years, we've seen more and more revelations about Exxon and other majors misleading the public and its investors. This is very well documented. And in this shameless climate denial work, they're using the exact same playbook as Big Tobacco did a generation before, from intimidating and threatening climate scientists. I have colleagues who've received death threats. They hire their own quote unquote scientists to go on TV and say CO2 is plant food or whatever their latest BS line is. They fund a nationwide network of think tanks and nonprofits that publish books, films, advertisements, websites, all saying that climate change is a hoax. Most importantly, placing their favorite climate denying politicians into office. And so you get headlines like this one, fossil fuel barons have poured more than 100 million into these campaigns, raising concerns. That is the understatement of the 21st century. Special interests run our government. And in this kind of using dark money to stymie climate action, two of these fossil fuel barons deserve special mention. Here are Charles and David, the infamous Koch brothers, who made their fortune on oil and gas. They poured almost $1 billion into the 2016 presidential election. Let's just say they got what they wanted, and they're out doing it again right now. I remember going to see Al Gore speak when I was back at Stanford. I'll never forget it because I had just had a hernia surgery that morning, so I was limping around. I had this little wheelie cart with a bag of local anesthetic that was pumping it into my inguinal area. I was in serious pain, but I wasn't going to miss Al Gore. They let me go to the front of the line, and I remember he's a powerful speaker. I'll never forget his words. He said, "We can't solve the climate crisis until we solve the democracy crisis." And he got very grave and he said, "And we have one. We do not live in a democracy in this country. We live in an oligarchy where the wealthiest industries control our government. The climate crisis and the democracy crisis are one and the same." Let's get political for a second and look at some of the actors in our democracy crisis, which drives the climate crisis. Scott Pruitt, his campaigns for Oklahoma Attorney General were generously sponsored by the fossil fuel industry. He spent his time at the EPA dismembering the agency, especially anything having to do with regulating fossil fuels or carbon emissions. But he's out and he's been replaced by a former coal lobbyist, Andrew Wheeler. That's the person in charge of the EPA. How about Rex Tillerson? Our former Secretary of State came straight from the CEO post of Exxon. Whose interest do you think he was advancing in his post as America's most powerful foreign diplomat? Us, the voters? I have my doubts about that. So Tillerson is out too, and incredibly, our new Secretary of State is perhaps the only person on earth even deeper in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry than the CEO of ExxonMobil. Mike Pompeo is the largest recipient of Koch brothers' money of any federal politician. Our vice president is perhaps the closest politician alive to the Koch brothers. He's helped them advance their no climate tax pledge to the point that it's been signed by over 150 members of US Congress. It's basically a vow to the Koch brothers to not take any climate action ever. This is the state of our democracy. By the way, do you notice anything else about any other similarities between all these people other than their fossil fuel ties? They're all white men. The links between climate justice and social justice become manifest. The point of all this is there's no longer any clear line separating the fossil fuel industry from our government. This is not new. This has been going on for a long time. It's just that the Trump administration has taken it to an almost unbelievable extreme. There's a word for this blurring of lines between industry and government, and that word is corruption. And the result of all this corruption, government policy that favors fossil fuel interests, rolling back auto emission standards, rolling back the Clean Power Plan that would have cleaned up our energy grid, undoing the methane emissions rule for fossil fuel extractions. These are the three signature climate efforts of the Obama administration: auto emission standards, the Clean Power Plan, and methane regulations. 1, 2, 3, gone. Just like that, poof. But the Trump administration didn't stop there. How about moving to open nearly all offshore waters to drilling? Opening up the Alaska refuge, shrinking national monuments. That has never happened before in history. Reopening federal lands to coal mining, and most notoriously withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord of December 2015 was a historic achievement, bringing together almost every nation with the goal of aggressively decarbonizing the global economy. So this action by Trump makes the United States the only nation on earth not committed to a global pact to reduce emissions. Does this all make you as furious as it makes me? When it comes to the corruption that drives the climate crisis, don't take my word for it. This is very well documented by some of our most respected investigative journalists. I'm bemused looking at this set of books and seeing that almost all the authors are women, a real contrast to the old white men we've just surveyed. I think it suggests a common sense change to our global leadership. And gosh, once you start looking at the world this way, you'll see it everywhere. The examples go on and on. Will Koch pull the plug on electric cars? Rooftop solar dims under pressure from industry lobbyists. At least this one has a good title. The Koch brothers are still trying to break wind. A Koch-fueled attack on electric buses picks up speed. We can't even get electric buses in this nation without the fossil fuel industry coming in and attacking it. Killing public transit projects around the country. How about this one? Pipeline to the classroom, how big oil promotes fossil fuels to America's children. It's sick. It's just sick. It's not just financial corruption or political corruption. It's moral and spiritual corruption. I told you I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. This is why I'm sitting here and I'm telling you that the fossil fuel industry is the enemy in the climate change fight. Their business model is based upon burning 5 times as much carbon as the atmosphere can safely absorb, and they know it. And I hope I've convinced you in the last few slides that they have no intention of changing that business model. Therefore, the only solution is to take them out of power. These corporations will not stop. They're incapable of stopping. All corporations can do is seek profit. They know no moral code. They have no conscience. Leaving $20 trillion in profits in the ground is impossible. They will watch the world burn before they give up their profits. This is the true nature of the climate crisis. And the proof of that is all around us right now, at a time when the scientific warnings are at fever pitch and the climate movement is stronger than it's ever been, and our nation is racked by one unnatural disaster after the other. These corporations are moving in exactly the opposite direction, towards more dirty, unsafe, extreme fuels, extreme extraction. We're talking about deep ocean drilling, Arctic drilling, mountaintop removal coal mining, hydraulic fracturing, aka fracking, and most infamously, the Alberta tar sands, which I'm showing here. Just look at this flayed landscape. This is the legacy of the fossil fuel era. Now, one of the first questions that comes to our mind when we see such a statement is, wait a minute, we all use fossil fuels. Most of us have cars, we fly on planes, we eat food that was shipped up from warmer climates. Therefore, we're all complicit in climate change. Now, how can you rail against fossil fuels when you use fossil fuels? This is a very natural response, and it's an extremely important point. So let's dig into the role of personal responsibility and personal action. When it comes to all this, there was a very important paper that came out in Science a few years ago by Elise Amel and her colleagues, and they're environmental psychologists. I think that's so cool. What they imagined was an individual who was looking to do their part to help change the world for the better. But because it's more interesting and more fun to be specific rather than general, I'm going to pick on Lisa, the fearless president and CEO of Alaska World Affairs Council. Lisa told me one of the things that she likes to do to reduce her carbon footprint is to bring reusable shopping bags to the grocery store. So Amel and colleagues define these various spheres of influence a person can have, all right? The first being the private and personal. This is the classic reduce, reuse, recycle level of action. For Lisa, it means bringing her reusable bags, and that's great. But maybe Lisa wants to think a little bigger. She might look at the next circle and encourage her friends and neighbors to get reusable bags too. She'll help her neighbor get a couple and leave them in their car or bike basket so that they're not forgotten. But even that might not be enough. She might move to the next level and actually start a community organization dedicated to reusable bags. They start up a co-op to distribute reusable bags to people for free and do community education about the benefits of reusable bags and the problems with one-time use plastic. As if that wasn't enough, now Lisa decides to run for state Congress in Alaska on the reusable bag platform. And when she wins, she's going to introduce legislation that everyone in Alaska has to use them. Disposable plastic bags are outlawed. It becomes the law of the land. And eventually, after Lisa does enough work and spreads enough of the reusable bag gospel, we reach the biggest sphere of influence, which is cultural. This is when we don't even need a law in the books forcing us into reusable bags, because of course we're going to reuse our bags. That's our culture. If you don't reuse your bags, you're not part of our tribe and you can leave. We're reusable bag people. But the most revealing thing about this diagram is that they put an axis on it. Notice that it goes from smallest impact at the top to largest impact at the bottom. And what it shows is that personal action is the smallest level of impact that we can have. If we want to fix climate change, personal action cannot be all that we aspire to. This is a global, systemic problem that requires global, systemic solutions. Think about what we've seen so far. Do you think fossil fuel executives are operating at the private and personal level up at the top? Do you think they're going into their boardrooms and saying, okay, fellas, here's our strategy for growing the industry. We're going to use more fossil fuels as individuals. We're going to drive more and fly more and use lots of disposable plastic bags. And that's going to increase demand for fossil fuels just a little bit. And that's going to make our companies more profitable. You think that's how they're operating? Hell no. I'll tell you the levels that the fossil fuel industry is operating on. They're operating where the real power is. They're operating in the public level, influencing elections through donations, lobbying, gaining political appointments, fueling voter suppression efforts. And they're operating on the cultural level, funding a sustained campaign to create a culture that distrusts science, and advertising to create a culture where to be a man, you have to drive a V8 350 truck. So if we're stuck up here wailing about our personal carbon footprint, and they're down there where the real power is, that nefarious circle is just going to keep on turning. This is why touting individual action to ourselves, to our friends and families, is actually a disservice, because it's a false tool. We're out here, we're telling our young people, hey, the earth is on fire. It's a mass extinction. It's a humanitarian disaster. And they look up at us with tears in their eyes and they say, what can we do? And we tell them, well, we'll change our light bulbs. Are you kidding me? The absurdity of the disconnect here baffles me. That solution has nothing to do with the scale of the problem, nothing to do with it. Asking people to fix climate change by changing their light bulbs is like asking them to fix global poverty by handing out dollar bills on the street. We understand that global poverty is a systemic problem requiring systemic solutions. Why don't we understand the same thing about climate change? And by the way, the two are intimately linked. What I tell my students is, by all means, do these things that reduce your dependence on fossil fuels. Ride your bike, grow a garden, get reusable bags, but don't do it because these things will fix the climate crisis. They won't. Do them because these things are the things that tend to make us healthier and happier. Ride your bike because you can hear the birds when you do, grow a garden because, as my buddy Hank says, worms are groovy creatures. Reuse bags because it feels good to your soul. Then go out and fix the climate crisis through collective action that's actually effective. See, this is what the fossil fuel industry wants us to believe, that it's our fault and that the only way to solve things is to change ourselves. Because as long as we believe that, we'll be stuck trying to change as individuals without changing the system. And they can keep right on drilling. And I'm not just speculating that that's what the fossil fuel industry wants us to believe. I'm not blowing smoke here. Many people don't realize that they've spent millions to convince us to blame ourselves. This piece details how the whole concept of the carbon footprint is a fossil fuel industry invention. It was conjured up by BP, British Petroleum, one of the majors, in 2005 in a $100 million ad campaign. And here's what that ad campaign looked like. Look at how they shift the blame. They're talking about your mark on the world, CO2 emitted due to your daily activities. Meanwhile, they're absurdly rebranding themselves beyond petroleum, even at the same time as they continue to lobby the government and fight tooth and nail against any policies to reduce the systemic addiction to fossil fuels. Look at how they end this. It's a start, and they know that it's only a start, that if we buy into this, it will make us totally ineffective at solving this crisis. And boy, have we bought into it. See, the problem with personal action and personal responsibility, these are lovely things, and I'll be the first to stand up and do them and encourage others to do them. But the problem is self-blame. My central message to you, you are not to blame for the climate crisis. This is not your fault. This is where it's at. Mary Heglar is a badass young woman of color, one of our best environmental writers. We've been talking about recycling and other personal actions for 3 decades, and in that time, carbon emissions have skyrocketed, growing by over 40%. It's time to realize that it doesn't work. We have to change the system, pull it up by the very roots of injustice, inequality, and unchecked corporate power. Here's the takeaway from the master himself, Bill McKibben. This is the most common question he receives as one of our most dedicated climate activists on the planet. He gives a simple answer: become less of an individual. Join the movement for climate justice. What does that look like? What are the tools? Divestment. This is possibly the best place for young people, especially students, to plug into the movement. Divestment means that organizations are pulling their investments and endowments out of the fossil fuel industry, reinvesting them elsewhere. To date, over 1,000 organizations, that's religious organizations, cities and towns, nonprofits, especially colleges and universities, have pulled out of fossil fuels. Over $14 trillion worth of assets have divested. So this is not fringe, it's definitely mainstream. And along the way, it's called huge attention to climate change and catalyzed a whole generation of young people to get involved in this movement. Divestment is being spearheaded by today's students. How about finance? Finance is the newest front in the climate wars. As McKibben puts it, money is the oxygen that fuels the climate crisis. Take away their financing and the fossil fuel industry can't operate. The preeminent group, which has just risen to prominence in the last year, is called Stop the Money Pipeline. They've particularly targeted Chase Bank, which has lent fossil fuels $196 billion since the Paris Climate Accord was signed in late 2015. This is an accord that Chase Bank purports to support, but it goes without saying that lending $196 billion to the industry is inconsistent with the goals of the Paris Accord. They are financing climate destruction. That has to stop. How else are people confronting the fossil fuel industry? Blockadia is a general term for people taking direct action to stop the reckless extraction. In some cases, it's motivated by climate change. In most cases, it's motivated by people simply defending their homeland from being strip mined and poisoned by the industry. And increasingly, these protesters are winning David versus Goliath battles. Just one example of the hundreds I could cite of the beautiful power of protest. You have the kayaktivists in the port of Seattle blocking the Polar Pioneer from heading up to the Arctic. And ultimately, after $5 billion in wasted investment, Shell dropped their Arctic drilling program, partly because of the bad press of this reckless, extreme drilling. And I've done my time protesting against Shell's plan to drill in the Arctic, a place that I love. We scientists are some of the only people to ever go there. If we don't defend it, who will? But this year, what's the biggest thing we can be doing right now? The most powerful tool at our disposal? We got to get political. The good folks at Alaska World Affairs and Common Ground and UAA might be a little uncomfortable with me getting political, as I have been and as I'm about to. Let me say right from the start, this is not their fault. I take all the blame. They don't condone political speaking. They don't endorse any political candidate. This is just me. And by speaking out politically like this, I might not get invited back. And that's okay. I can live with that. But we have to get political to solve the climate crisis. You know, I won't sit here and watch one political party block climate action for 3 decades and then pretend it's not a political problem. And I won't stand here and deprive you of the actual tools that can turn things around and preserve a habitable planet. I won't tell you the world is on fire and then tell you the best we can do is change our light bulbs. The tools that will turn this around are political tools because this is a political crisis. So I'm speaking out and I hope you will too. It's not about Republicans or Democrats or even independents. It's about the urgent, literally life or death need to elect leaders who are not corrupted by the industry and are therefore free to act. So I won't waste time trying to convince you how crucial it is to defeat Donald Trump, our most destructive environmental president ever by far. But the US Senate is every bit as important because even if we elect Biden, who has the strongest climate platform of any presidential nominee in history, all our ambition will go nowhere as long as Mitch McConnell is Senate Majority Leader. He can and will block all meaningful climate legislation. This is the US Senate map. This is the big 4 toss-up states where climate leaders could take control, paving the way for ambitious climate legislation like the world has never seen. And there are other targets beyond these 4: Georgia, Iowa, Texas, Montana, even Kansas, and Alaska. The incumbent is Dan Sullivan, a paragon of the very corruption we've been speaking about. What I'm showing here is the top US Senate recipients of oil and gas money. There he is, number 11 on the list, taking over $250,000, and that's just this year. And what's the result of him being bought by the fossil fuel industry? Well, he's a climate denier, of course. And I quote, "Despite what many climate change alarmists want us to believe, there is no general consensus on pinpointing the sole cause of global temperature trends." So that line is BS from start to finish. And here I'm showing the League of Conservation Voters scorecard. This is not a perfect measure of his climate record, but it gives you a good idea. A lifetime score of 8%. Dan Sullivan is helping kill the planet. It's 2020, people. At this late stage, with all we know, no climate denier should ever be elected to office again. We need to kick him out. Dr. Al Gross obviously does not deny climate change and will act, and the race is close. So if you've been waiting, if you've been feeling uncertain about getting involved and getting active, wait no longer. Now is our moment. I've been volunteering as hard as I possibly can. Your vote is not enough. Listen, voting is the bare minimum. Voting is personal action. Campaigning is collective action. Amplify your impact. Join the movement. We have to donate. We have to volunteer, make calls, knock doors. If Al wins the Alaska race, we almost certainly flip the US Senate, paving the way for desperately needed climate action. It's not an overstatement to say that the fate of the biosphere and the human project depends largely on what happens this November the 3rd. What would you do if the fate of the living world would be decided in 39 days? What action would you take? These 39 days are an opportunity we will not get back. I assure you this chance will not come again. I happen to believe that Alaska's US Senate race is the biggest lever Alaskans can pull that would shift the balance of power away from climate deniers at the highest level. But you may have your own ideas about the best ways to get involved. Then by all means, go and do it. I'll do it with you. Let's work together. If you want to get involved but you don't know where to start, please contact me. I'll help point you in the right direction. I will drop my email into the chat. 39 days. If January comes and Trump is still in the White House and Republicans still hold a majority in the Senate and our world plunges into climate chaos, I want to be able to look in a mirror and say I did everything I could. I want that for you as well. It truly is now or never for the climate crisis. Rebecca Solnit, one of our great climate writers, says the best thing we can do to fight climate change is try, because we never know the impacts of our actions, the nonlinear effects that will spiral out. The future isn't written yet. I want you all to know that you're not alone. There are millions of us trying. So I'll just leave you with this climate comic and stop share.
Okay, you're on mute, Zach. There
Hey
you go.
again, everybody. That was it. Thanks very much for joining.
Thank you so much, Zach. So you are invited back again. Yes, the Alaska World Affairs Council is non-political, non-partisan, and all the views expressed are the views of our speakers, not the organization, but we appreciate civil discourse and conversations like the one today that helps us so that we can have these type of conversations today and in the future. Now we have some time left over to ask some questions for our speaker. Please type it in the chat room and I will read off your questions. And while you're typing away in the chat room, I'm gonna ask our other partner who I saw join us, Carl Broderson, the president of the Juneau World Affairs Council, to say some words, hello from Juneau, and be the first person to ask a question of our speaker. You can ask it directly, Carl. So great to see you.
Hello, great to see you. Hello from Juneau. Zach, the 2 degrees thing is being adopted as a good way of describing very quickly the problem. And I think it does something of a disservice because 2 degrees doesn't feel like anything to the average person. There's a great XKCD comic where the guy was mapping out, 1.5 degrees meant, tyrannosaurs and palm trees in the Antarctic. And that's a really good way of describing it. In terms of messaging here, has anyone ever thought about trying to come up with a wind chill conversion factor where 2 degrees actually means on average it's going to feel 30 degrees warmer every single day, just to put it into more immediately understandable human terms, especially for the people who are naturally disinclined to think that any of this matters at all?
Great question. I don't know how good an answer I can come up with. I think messaging has been a ongoing, constant battle for climate scientists and champions, and the 2 degrees is a challenge, as you point out, because it doesn't seem like a lot. And so, one of the ways that the message can be reframed is if you read The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, one of the things that he points out is just the 2 degrees, of course, is a global average. We know that Alaska is warming at twice the rate of the rest of the US, one of the fastest warming places on the planet. And this average, of course, doesn't capture the impacts to certain areas. For example, at 2 degrees, there are already going to be regions of Southeast Asia, the Middle East, North Africa that are going to be largely uninhabitable because of just heat that the human animal cannot withstand. And so I think that there are ways to speak about the impacts. The climate movement has gotten much better about putting climate impacts into human terms and terms of justice. You don't hear people talking about saving polar bears anymore. You hear about what this is doing to human communities. And so I think the messaging has really improved, especially over the last decade. But the 2 degree average thing, as you point out, is a real challenge to convey what that actually means.
Zach, we've got a question coming in here about ocean acidification. So there's a bit of a comment saying, Alaskans, we understand temperature and global warming, but how about ocean acidification? Very little is known about this and the threat it has to our fisheries. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm no expert in ocean acidification, but it's people refer to it as the other carbon problem because it has of course exactly the same causes and therefore exactly the same solutions. So an excess of CO2 in our atmosphere, which ends up in our ocean, and the combination of CO2 and water makes carbonic acid. And so the global ocean has gotten something like 30% more acidic in the last few decades. And I haven't been following the cutting edge literature over the last 3 or 4 years or so, but there's a lot of concern about how ocean acidification will affect our fisheries. There's the prey for salmon, especially pink salmon, is these little guys called pteropods that seem to be very, they're little marine snails that seem to be very susceptible to the impacts of ocean acidification. You know, the overarching concern is that when water is acid, acid breaks down carbonate, various forms of calcium carbonate, and that's what critters use to make their shells. It's also what coral reefs use to build their colonies. And so we're watching a major threat to oceanic life that is carbonate based. What the latest is and how people are talking about it right now, I don't know, but I can just say that if it has the exact same causes and the exact same solutions as the climate crisis, then let's bring everybody into the fold and work together.
We've got some great questions coming through. Before I get to Sue Mauger's question, which is really, really good question, I want to actually turn the microphone over to another one of our partners from UAA APU Bookstore, Libby Roderick, and give her an opportunity to ask a question and say hello. Thanks for partnering with us today.
Thanks very much to you, and so glad to see everyone here. Thanks so much, Zach, to you also. I'm actually representing the UAA APU Books of the Year program, which is part of our Difficult Dialogues initiative at UAA. And our theme is building community resilience. So we host a bunch of forums like this because climate is, of course, critical to our community resilience. And I wanted to just say a couple things about the political aspect of this, because we also at the university, of course, are committed to having dialogue from every perspective that we can give voice to. At the same time, we are not value free at a university. A university is committed to discussions that are based on evidence. We are committed to science. There has been, and we've been having events on disinformation, and we are in the midst of disinformation campaigns. So I don't think that this is a political discussion that you need to be worried about, Zach, nor should any of us. So the Books of the Year just has books that help people talk in the community and at the university about topics. And one of them, as Fran Ulmer mentioned in the chat, is Drawdown, which is a book that looks at global solutions to the problems that we're facing. So I can say more about that, but I won't. Let me elevate a question I saw in the chat from someone else, which has to do with how we in Alaska can move closer to the Green New Deal in some localized sense. And I want to also throw in, because I know Al Gross is here, how can people in the Congress, assuming we get the right people there, move legislation forward? What's going on at that level? Thanks.
Wow. Well, that big questions, and I almost feel like I should give the floor to Al. I didn't actually realize he was here. That's very exciting. But I would say that, so I know that Al is not running on explicitly a Green New Deal platform, that he but he has a strong climate plan, strong climate stance. And that's why I support him with my bottom dollar. But I think that the way that, the Green New Deal is about this marriage between climate justice and social justice. It's this it's the sort of policy framework around a just transition. That means a rapid shift in our global energy systems, but not just that, our food systems, our transportation systems, and more, our buildings, in such a way that creates millions of good paying jobs, and that also leaves no one behind and has protections for our frontline communities. People who are losing jobs because of this transition, to provide robust training programs, things of that nature. I think Alaska could be ground zero for this kind of inventive thinking and this just transition. There's a statewide coalition that's talking a lot about just transition work now, that I've just kind of been a fly on the wall a little bit. But we, especially our very strong indigenous presence here in Alaska, I think can cause us to be real leaders in Green New Deal type thinking. But the power structures being what they are, the actual legislation won't pass until we that will bring us down that road won't pass. The values will be there, but the legislation won't pass until we elect climate champions. So I don't, Al, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think you can hear me now. Sorry, I had to change venues, and I guess I missed a question. But I just wanted to say thank you very much, Zach, and thank you, Lisa, for doing this. And it's really, really, really important that we be proactive on this. And this is an oil and gas state. 1 out of 3 jobs here in the state are based on an oil economy. But I think we can create a lot of jobs through clean energy and renewable energy. And I'm really looking forward to leading the way, or helping to lead the way when I get to the Senate.
Okay, we're going to ask one more question before we sign off here. And this is about divestiture in our state. So Alaska's economy and state revenues are painfully tied to oil and gas, is the question. With low oil prices, we have an important opportunity. What is your thinking about best steps for Alaska to divest?
Yeah, this is a great question. I know that the Juneau 350 group, one of their main campaigns has been encouraging the Alaska Permanent Fund to divest from fossil fuels, if you can believe that. The amazing thing is that's not actually so quixotic, so unrealistic as it would seem, because divestment is making more and more sense on a purely financial level. oil and gas are the worst, or energy generally is the worst performing sector in the stock market the last 2 years running. ExxonMobil was just moved out of the S&P 500 top 10 for the first time in history. You know, these stocks are falling, and as we see this this continued reduction in demand, you know, where due to the pandemic, we may have hit peak oil demand this year, which would be at least a decade ahead of even the most optimistic projections. And with that flagging demand, why those share prices aren't going to be coming back up anytime soon. And so divestment is going mainstream even among circles who don't care too much about the climate. So I think that Alaska has an opportunity there to certainly diversify its economy. Please, for the love of God. I mean, we're just watching our state unravel because of our dependence on those revenues, but also for the actual investments to pay off at an equal or greater level through divestment.
Thank you so much, everyone. It has now been an hour. We really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day to come and join us here at the Alaska World Affairs Council. And thank all our partners, Juneau World Affairs Council, Alaska Common Ground, UAA, APU Books of the Year. All of these organizations believe in quality education and increasing global competency, and it's programs like this that help make that possible. So thank you to our partners, and thank you to all of you. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them our way. We are constantly trying to improve our educational programming. So please send us your ideas, and I hope to see everyone again soon. Like I said, we've got a lot going on in October. Join our website where we will have information about upcoming programs, as well as a link so you can watch this one again and send it to your friends. Thank you everyone for coming, and have a wonderful day.